Hello, everybody. Welcome to Purelite Ventures Presents. My name is Nanaya Mensa, and I am here to introduce you to two wonderful women who work within the VC ecosystem within customer experience. Now, that being the case, what we really want to do is we really want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So, that being the case, I'm going to ask Manasi to introduce herself as founder of Safrela Consulting. But before I do that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about what we do at Purelite Ventures. So, Purelite Ventures is a healthcare specific venture capital firm that works out of New York City. Now, what we do is we invest in life sciences, biotechnology. We also invest in healthcare AI and SaaS as a medical device. And I am joined today by Emmanuel Tutu. He works with Purelite Ventures and he is also sourcing. He does due diligence and he is also our master of ceremonies for this particular Purelite Ventures Presents. Emmanuel, give everybody a hello. And also, if you have a deck, a healthcare deck that you'd like to share, Emmanuel can put his information in the chat so you can send him an email with your pitch deck. And so without further ado, Manasi Shukla, I'm so happy to have you here today. And I would love for everybody to learn more about who you are and what you do.
So I'll continue. So basically what I do is I really help companies think about product adoption and retention and the type of impact that they want to make in for their healthcare customers, whether it's clinicians, physicians, or even patients. My background is I'm a biomedical engineer and a computer engineer. And I've worked for large device companies such as Medtronic and Intuitive Surgical, and I've also worked for several startups. And I founded Safrela Consulting 4 years ago, and since then I've had the pleasure of working with some very innovative companies, and it's been very exciting. And I'll pass it back to you, Nanaya.
Hi. Okay, I'll give my intro. I'm Natalie Jackson. I founded Crescent Consultancy about 2 years ago to help organizations smooth out their customer experience, which is largely tied to their employee experience, oftentimes of needing to scale, moments of disruption. And for me, I consider myself a CX strategist. I've been doing this for a long time across a variety of organizations and have served in the medical device space with Tandem Diabetes and most recently Noctrix Health, both in med device. Very excited to be here, and also we'll lean into making sure that we're all aligned on what our view of customer experience is, and oftentimes the patient experience is something they'll be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mansi and Natalie, for those introductions. Natalie, I'll have you start with your presentation, and then we will enter into a time of questions that we will have. So if you're able to share your screen, or if you want me to.
Yeah, I'll share my screen, no problem. Okay. So can you all see my screen?
There you go.
Okay. Fantastic. So this is just oftentimes when I share that I'm in customer experience, everybody often assumes, well, that means you're in customer success or customer support, or you design apps. Well, all of those things you can see up at the top, that's all part of customer experience. But the definition that we like to use is this is brand activation across all touch points. So that's every moment when a potentially customer learns about a brand through to when they're deciding if they might join, when they grow with you and engage with you, to when they become huge fans and they're referring and they're loyal. It's people-powered, cross-functional, and takes quite a bit to get everybody aligned and on board, which is why Manasi and I work so well together, because we bring different pieces of that equation together. And we mentioned that customer experience is measurable. When executives prioritize the customer experience, retention rates improve by 80%. That's just another example of how this is truly measurable. Manasi?
Yeah. So customer education feeds into customer experience, and it's customer education is the strategy, development, and delivery of training programs to make sure that the customers not just understand what the product is, but they also use the product or the service. And the customer education applies not just to customers, but to internal teams as well. And it's empowering the internal teams to make sure that they're aligned and trained and ready to support the customer. And the way that I like to explain it is customer education is sort of the thin line that feeds and supports sales, marketing, product, customer success. And it's sort of the backbone supporting all of these functions to make sure that they're providing the best support to the customer. And why it matters, and this was a study that was done in 2024 that shows that for organizations that have a customer education strategy, they saw a 7.6% increase in revenue, and they saw a 38.3% increase in product adoption. So, and also I'd like to point out 26.2% improvement in customer satisfaction. So there's a lot of power in having a strategic customer education.
Very good. And one of the vehicles that I use and we both use is journey mapping. This is another one where sometimes there are misconceptions about what we'll say end-to-end customer journey mapping is. So it's not a process map. It's not a one-time piece of work that you put up on the wall and say, well, we did that in that workshop together. And it's not intended to be used just to design one flow. What it is a pretty incredible tool for getting teams aligned around goals, the friction points across the journey, and learning what each other does from, when you think about the handoffs from one team to the next. We'll share an example in just a moment, but it is a method for visualizing emotions, behaviors. Oftentimes I include effort in there as well, and it's truly foundational. It's meant to be revisited once you have more information. And, some prerequisites, I'll say, to be successful is having a very clear vision and experiential North Star. So knowing how you want to show up as a brand. We talked about being brand activation across all touch points. Well, does everybody understand that? Do they feel equipped to show up that way? Also a data-backed customer profile. We have a little example of this, but you can do formal segmentation. If you don't have that done and haven't done that research, starting with what you know, so you're clear about who you're talking about when journey mapping is critical. And always recommend having a CX strategist guide through this process, one for the third party perspective to bring out some themes that might be uncomfortable, and also to make sure that you're extracting what's most useful to take action right away and make sure that the changes are measurable. Journey alignment rating, you can see it when employees understand that journey, CX scores improve by 20 to 30% as they can have more empathy for their customer and for each other through the process, and have much more clarity about who to go to and what's coming next. Okay, to give a quick sample, Manasi and I put this together just to illustrate, and she and I have done this work together in the med device space. So for this, the company overview, you can see it's a healthcare company, Series A. We estimated the revenue range, and we said, in this case, it's a patient, male or female, 40 to 60 years with type A diabetes. So this is, they're using injections, but they're ready to test out using a device. They want to stay active, and they're feeling nervous and unprepared. They're not fully educated yet. So this is a sample. You can visualize a journey map in all different ways and in the branding, but just to share what I like to include here. At the very top, there's the stage of where that patient is. From awareness, they're learning about this option, and then they're really having to think about it, perhaps with support from the brand to feel more educated. They're talking to peers, their providers, doctors, specialists, and then they get into the prescription and purchase stage. This one requires quite a bit of help if they need to go through insurance or pay out of pocket. Then they get to onboarding, which Manasi will dig into in just a moment, where they're learning about how to use the device. And then they get into a flow while they're using it and perhaps ordering additional parts that they need or asking for some help with patient support. And then they become huge fans. It's changed their day-to-day lifestyle, and they want to share that with everyone. And I have seen this. They're champions that just want to speak about how a device has changed their life. You can see across the middle the patient emotions. This is just to get a quick visual on how they're feeling. And with the effort, some of what you see with the effort, that might be something that is out of the brand's control. But how do we then show up to help with that effort? If it's a really big life decision, how are we showing up with empathy and making sure that we're educating along the way? And then we flip it, we put our company, our brand hat on, and we think, what are we trying to accomplish in this stage? And how are we measuring that success? With thinking about the venture space, there's a lot of overlap with those goals and the measurable pieces within each stage. We've bolded a few of them, from thinking about churn to conversion, or in this case, prescription fill rates, time to value, which Manasi will talk about. So when do they actually start to feel something after they've made this huge life decision? And then patient satisfaction and other service metrics, which is a whole thing we could unpack, another time. There's a lot in there, but net resolution score is a great one. Did you help me when I called and asked for help for this thing that's really important for my life? And then customer lifetime value, which also, of course, comes up when valuing a company, and then net promoter score as well, so NPS. Okay, Manasi.
So what basically from what Natalie has done, so she, when she works with leadership teams, they come up with a high level alignment on what that journey looks like for the customer. And so in the work that I do, I can take all of that information, and let's say for now, and I know for companies that are just, let's say, going to market or launching the product, onboarding is critical. And so what I've done here is taken a sample of what onboarding would look like for this company and for the diabetes product. So to capture all the information from that customer journey, and we look at what are the different stages of the onboarding to get from the patient to who's now the doctor has prescribed this device, all the way for them to start using it and then to get the support. So in the work that I do, similar to Natalie, I like to put together a training journey so that, again, everyone's aligned on what are we doing for each phase. So you can see in the first one, there's a description, there's a training workflow. So I like to really drill down into the details. So training workflow, for example, is for each step, what are we doing to make sure that they not just understand what the product is, but that they truly understand how to use it, because that's how we're creating the product champions, is we really want them to understand how this device is helping them. And then I dive into the training materials now to support the customer or the patient in this case at each stage. What type of training materials do we need? So is it a PDF? Is it a video? Do we need to do a live Q&A with the customer success team? So really, we talk through all of those as we're building out the training journey to make sure that the patient's supported at every stage. And then I also like to focus on the internal actions. So for each phase, who are the internal owners? We want to make sure that even internally, whether it's marketing, sales, customer success, everyone understands what their role is in making sure that this is a success. And then the pain points is what I bring in from the work that Natalie has done, because we want to address that head on. So what I like to do is learn about those pain points, speak to, if it's an opportunity to speak to patients, perhaps speak to the customer success team to gather all of that information and make sure that we preemptively include it in this onboarding journey. So we address it straight away. And then using the metrics to make sure that we are using metrics such as time to value. In this case, if that's what the company wants to use, then that's what we'll use to start tracking how we're responding to the onboarding, and then how we're tracking it.
Very good.
All right, that's it for us, Emmanuel.
Okay. Thank you so much, you guys, for that presentation on customer experience. I think it's really helpful for a lot of us who are on here listening to really know about how to start when we're thinking about startups, when we're thinking about reaching out to customers, because that's important. Because you can start a company, but if you can't find people to buy your products, then that's a really huge problem. And that is that talk or presentation you guys really gave was really insightful. So thank you guys so much. There are a couple of questions that we prepared that I kind of want to ask both of you before we get into the CX side. I kind of want to ask, why did you gravitate towards working with startups within the healthcare venture capital? That's like it's two parts. So I'll start with that one. Manasi, I'll start with you. Why did you gravitate towards working with startups within the healthcare VC space? And then Natalie, I'll also ask you the same question as well.
Sure. So I've been in healthcare. My career has been in healthcare. So it's been over 20 years. I gravitated healthcare. Basically, honestly, I know this is going way back, but when I was 14, I started volunteering in hospitals, and I really saw the impact one person can have on patients and their experience. And that's really where it all started. And fast forward many years later, after doing engineering school, I wanted to have an impact on patients and just in healthcare. And I started working for large device companies. When I worked for Medtronic, I actually worked in the field. So I was in the hospital, really got to see all of what it's like at the end, how the patients are interacting with the products, what is their experience, and how to support them. And then same thing for clinicians and physicians as well. And over the course of the years, after working for device companies, I was very attracted to the startup space because there's so many innovative products that are coming out, so many innovative technologies, and to be able to support them, to make sure that as they go to market, that customers and whoever that customer is, whether it's a patient or a physician or a hospital system, knows how to use it. There's a lot of value in that. And so for me to support them, given my experience, gives me purpose. And I find it of a lot of value.
Thank you. Natalie, same question to you.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I have worked across a variety of industries, but just getting a little exposure into the healthcare space and understanding that patients are at the center, that's why the companies are there to help. And I connect with that very much. And then just to be able to bring what I've learned about being more effective, teaching teams how to show up, whatever it is with empathy or a white glove experience, it means something. And some of the organizations that I've helped, many of the employees are also patients and really resonate with how they can improve lives. And similar to Manasi, being able to interview employees and interview patients and hear their real stories just makes me feel more connected, and I guess really good that I can help.
That is really great. And I think you guys kind of answered my next question, was what inspires you to continue to be active in this space. So we'll kind of skip that part and then really dive into about CX and understanding its impact in startups. Obviously, from the ideological phase, or just maybe writing it on a piece of paper or a napkin or something, to really making like a big business or a Fortune 500 company business. Obviously, customer experience is a huge part of that. So, Natalie, why do you see CX as important to a startup's growth?
Yeah. Well, if you think about all the excitement and all of the time and all of the iterations to get to be ready to go to market, there's so much energy put in that, and oftentimes investment in that part of it, right? The product side and the go-to-market plan. Well, what I realized, X number of years ago, is that the customer experience is everything. What happens after? So you have a rollout plan and you go to market, but then what happens if you can't fulfill orders or there's an issue? Is the team equipped on how to show up to make sure that the rest of the experience goes well? And do you have the tools in place to be able to measure and track and improve? There's so much foundational there are so much that is foundational in CX that is not widely known, but putting those in place when like the house is clean and you're ready to get going is so much easier than unwinding. Although I suppose I wouldn't be busy if I wasn't helping unwind things and improve things.
Mansi, the same question to you. From your perspective, how do you see it as important to the startup growth?
Well, very similar to what Natalie said. And in addition to that, as she mentioned, companies are working really hard to get their product to market. But the real question is what happens after that? It's not just about, putting the product out there and then hoping people use it. It's really about being very thoughtful about how it's going to be used. And it's almost like guiding them into letting them know here's the best way to use this product. And then after that, once they become comfortable with it, then sort of opening the floodgates and letting them try things and experience different things. And then also, especially in the VC space, when the product has gone to market, you really want to capture those early adopters because they're trying something new. And so we want to support them and we want to also showcase them as well. And so all of that thought really makes the product successful and also gives a good customer experience as well, because for them, it's not just about using another product. We don't want them to feel that way. We want them to feel like this is something that is going to improve their workflow and really make things better for them. So the customer experience and thinking about it strategically matters.
That's really great. I kind of like when you talked about early adopters. I kind of want to pivot a bit, ask this question. Obviously, the approach from getting the early customers to maybe late adopters, maybe mid-stage adopters is different across every single startup. So from your roles, if a company, how do you help those founders if they're they want to acquire that first adopter, or maybe somebody who's been in it for a while, but they want to get more late stage adopters or more people on board? Obviously the roles or the ideas are different, but how do you guys see that, and how do you guys work with those type of founders? What approaches do you put in place? What sort of plans do you come up with them? And how do you see it differently at different stages?
Mansi, I wonder if I could take the start of that. And
sure, go ahead.
What came to mind in that when you asked that question is needing to really understand your patients and making sure that you're doing that work up front, whether you're coming out of a clinical trial or whatever it is, to grab those data points and understand who those different patients are, because early adopters might have, serious comorbidities and really are desperate to find something, and they're going to be clamoring to find you. Whereas someone who maybe was recently diagnosed, they're going to have a different mindset and they might be a little bit more skeptical going in. So that's, Mansi, you tell me, but that's what came to mind.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify, when we say early adopters, the question that comes to my mind is who are we speaking about? Because when we say early adopters, it could be the patient, if when the device is going to the patient, or it could even be a physician could be the early adopter, because they're the ones actually prescribing the device the product to the patient. So so Natalie kind of answered for the patient, and I'll answer a little bit on the physician end. The early adopter for physician, like when I've worked with companies and we are working with early adopter physicians, they're really excited. That's what I've generally found, is they're really excited to try new technology. They're kind of are excited about it and they want to use it. So they're basically great to co-create. So as the product is evolving and as we're creating these new training programs, they are very honest in their feedback. We have them go through the training and we really get good feedback on what they thought and how it can be improved. And so they're a great place to test it, because they do, they're honest about their feedback. Yeah. And then by the time we get to the late adopters, it's really important to have a very strong training program and a strategy, and understand what will it take to get those late adopters to come on board. So it's giving it time to figure out what is their motivation, and then making sure that that's baked into the training and go to market, or I should say training strategy, because you've already gone to market at that point.
That's really great. Thank you guys both so much for that response, because obviously you can get the first adopter for the physician on board, but retaining them is also a huge piece of that. Because obviously, sorry, go ahead, Natalie.
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah, I was just gonna say that the approach in doing a journey map and following what Manasi shared for the providers, it's another way. And she and I have handed off on projects in a similar way, in the med device space, to be able to map that out and say, well, these particular providers may be generalists, but over here, these are, the specialists or the quality care centers, and we're going to approach them and foster relationships differently. So I'm so glad that you both went there, because that is a huge part of it.
Yeah. So we'll kind of dive it a bit more into talking about founders, obviously. So how does the founder decide to approach you? And then how do you determine the right fit? So Natalie, I'll ask you, how do you determine the right fit? And then Manasi, I'll ask you, how does the founder decide to approach you? So we'll start with you, Natalie, on that.
Sure.
So how do you determine that this is a right fit for this founder?
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk about customer experience, there's 8 key things in order to make sure that you're setting up the right foundation. And the very first and the most important is having a executive buy-in and understanding of customer experience being completely end-to-end, and all those touch points for customers and employees, all the different types of customers, right? We talked about a few, but also having a culture that supports building a customer experience and that's collaborative, and whatever those things are to foster listening to employees and listening to the customer and being able to adapt and execute. So I think it's a little bit of a mindset. There's always, like, if there's disruption and a need to scale, we talk about that part of it, because that's a great moment to jump in and prioritize and adapt to their culture. But having executive buy-in is so critical for someone who is open to this approach and looking across the whole organization.
Okay. So if there isn't that buy-in, does that immediately halt the process, or like how would you go about maybe helping them get those executive buy-ins?
Yeah, just having conversations and sharing real stories about what an impact it can be. And also sharing, when there are those barriers, it's not going to be effective. If, someone over here doesn't know how to show up because they weren't trained, how can we expect them to deliver an exceptional customer experience if they don't know how to show up, or what those expectations are, or what the vision of the company is? So often with an engagement, the very first thing is getting aligned with those advisors. And I do quite a long, I'd say, preparation stage before even kicking off with the team, just to make sure that I'm super clear on what they're after, that we're speaking the same language, that we know where we think those pain points are, and then we can go together and talk to the right folks and listen. So it's not insurmountable. It's definitely necessary, though, to be aligned. I'm there to support, I'm there to adapt with them, but I'm also there to guide.
Okay. So Manasi, with your question, so before I as a founder, I want to go to market and commercialize, how do I decide to approach you? Like, how does that process work?
So what in terms of creating a training program or like a customer education strategy, it takes about 6 months. That's what I like to say, before commercialization, because there's 2 parts to it. There's the team alignment internally, kind of like what I've talked about today, is making sure that internally there's different teams that are ready to support the customer. And then there's actually the development part, which is creating all of the training, the support content, all of that stuff, which also takes time. So usually I like to say at least 6 months before go to market or commercialization. And similar to Natalie, it's really important to have that internal champion. Like, I'm there to co-create with the company. I'm there to partner with them. And similar to Natalie, I'm there to guide them. But I really need someone internally who is representing the company, and we'll work together to make sure that whatever we create, the is successful. And also, ideally, they're also the ones pulling in other team members within the company. If I need to speak to someone in customer success, or I need to speak to a customer or sales, so they're also helping navigate those conversations.
Okay. So the next question I had, there's one that I really stuck out to me was, I kind of want to really throw that one out there really quickly. How do you approach like geopolitical issues based on territory within your framework? Is it international or is it US based? Obviously, we know there's a lot of politics going on. How does that play a role within your work?
Do you want me to? So right now I'm focusing on the US market because it makes, because I've worked in the US market for a long time, I understand the nuances of US healthcare. So that's sort of sticking to the US market right now. And for me, at the end of the day, it's the patient, and that's the most important thing. So that's what I like to focus on. And really help the company get to creating like a customer training strategy that is focused on the patient. And so I do think about, geopolitical issues, and if there are ways that it's impacting the company in what's happening, I like to make sure that I'm aware of it and incorporate that into the training, because sometimes it may change how we deliver it or who we're delivering it to. So I kind of work with the company depending on what their situation is.
Natalie, the same question to you.
Yeah. What came to mind for me when you asked that was more about industries that are highly regulated. And I've done quite a bit of work in financial services, and we're talking about healthcare today. So I have found that, I focus on the US, so I've worked with quite a few global clients. It's leaning on the internal experts if there's more to consider. And as we go through journey mapping, we'll surface, or touch point mapping, which is more detailed, opportunities like the pain points and things that Manasi was sharing before. Those come up, and sometimes they're around a policy, and we're telling our, let's say, the provider, doctor, whoever it is, we're telling them, no, we can't do that, or we can't do this, and make it easier because of a policy. So then we'll bring in legal and compliance and risk, and then we'll, see if we can adjust the policy, or if there was a new policy, how are we rolling that out? So we get pretty granular. And I think it's, for at least the work that I do, it's more around that and leaning on the experts, less so than addressing anything beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think also, I just wanted to add one more thing, like what Natalie brought up too, is really working with the subject matter experts in the work that I do, and I know she does as well. And they're the ones that have been, in that field for many years. And so as the work that I'm doing specifically, I really rely on them to provide me with that additional color, that additional context that I may not have. And so making sure that they are also included, or at least they're interviewed and their experience is incorporated into what I'm building.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question and response that you guys really gave, because obviously as a founder, you have to think about different markets that you're going to be entering, the different regulatories and different legals, the politics in that in those countries or in those markets that you have to really account for. So it's really insightful the answers you guys gave to that question for founders who may be looking to go into a different market, like the Asian market or the African market or the Canadian market. What are the geopolitical issues in there, and how might that affect you? And if you don't consider those things, then that's kind of a red flag right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to go back a bit and talk about startups and their timeline and when they should really be considering CX. So at what points in the life cycle of a startup should a founder reach out to you specifically for that advice, for that support? Natalie, if you could speak to that, and then Manasi,
Yeah, of course. I know Manasi mentioned before, like around 6 months or so after. I think if we think through some of the startup stages, if someone's in sort of prototype or validation or clinical trials, whatever that is, maybe not yet the moment, but good to start thinking a little bit. But when they get to kind of pre-launch or even go to launch, go to market, and the growth stage, it's a great time to have us come in to be able to just pressure test how things are set up and look for that consistency, or where we can smooth things out once you have something that you're putting out there or that is out there, and maybe you notice a couple areas that need some, as I said, smoothing out.
Okay. And Manasi, when you're speaking to that, I kind of want to ask this in there. Why 6 months? Why is that the time?
So it depends on the product. So generally I would say 6 months because they've had, and I would say at least 6 months because they've had that, and they've already developed the MVP, and now they're starting to develop the go-to-market strategy. So in terms of the product and some of the support and the internal alignment's already there. And so when I come in, we can really sort of roll up our sleeves and think about, okay, this is the customer and what type of experience do we want to give them, and start building it out. Now, the caveat I would say is if it's for, and that works generally like in the work that I've done with companies for, let's say, digital health, mental health, health tech companies, 6 to 7 months is a good framework. For med device companies, I would actually pull that out to even earlier, because even to product development, because thinking about how you're going to train the customer as they're developing the product can really help them refine it, so that once they are ready to launch, and then they start creating training, and then they realize, oh, well, this was probably not the best way. We could have made these modifications. You kind of tend to avoid that a little bit. So, for example, when I worked with Intuitive Surgical, I did work with the product team to develop the training. So I worked with the engineers, the human factors engineers as well, the mechanical engineers, and I was developing the training. And so that really helped frame how the product is going to evolve as well, since we're already thinking about training.
Okay. So then how do you work alongside those go-to-market and commercialization initiatives that you spoke about?
So what I do is, first, I understand what's the goal? What is the metric that we're trying to achieve? So, for example, for go-to-market, are we focusing on onboarding? Like, what exactly are we focusing on first? So I look at that. I try to understand what is the market, what's the landscape that we're working in, who are we trying to launch to, who's our primary customer. Those are all the conversations that we have, because I want to make sure that whatever I'm designing is basically created for the right person. And so I really spend a lot of time understanding the landscape, understanding the customer, looking at even what are the other teams doing? What's customer success doing? What's sales doing? What's marketing doing? Because that gives me a full 360 view of the company and of the customer. And then that allows me to build something that will, not just for launch, but really what will scale.
And then Natalie, from your perspective and your role as well, how do you work alongside those initiatives?
Yeah, I guess I can give an example. So a head of marketing and sales who had a background in customer experience and understanding the value of the work brought me in to work with the newly formed sales and marketing team to get aligned about how we want to show up, what's that North Star. Getting set up in that way together then equips everyone to say, okay, well, that's going to help me show up when I'm out there selling, educating, and then journey mapping together based on what we knew. So this was just with sales and marketing, which is unusual. And then we started to bring in product, but they had a state by state rollout strategy given how they were getting approvals. So then we would adapt and adjust together. They invited me back 4 different times to refresh, and then go in and do the same thing for the provider strategy as they were shaping how they were going to show up with inside sales and outside sales and the marketing side of things. So, but coming in early days when they have their plan, but they know that it's going to be iterative is key, because then we were able to say, well, now focus on this. And they even brought some of the work that we did to the board to say, look how complicated and tricky this is for a patient right now with all these touch points and all these things and all these internal handoffs that are manual. let's make a case to, for example, get Salesforce in so that we can smooth this out. And let's automate these reports and look at these points along here. That's deeper than journey mapping, that's touch point mapping. But that's completely alongside executing their go-to-market strategy and adapting and adjusting so that they can execute that soundly and collectively.
That's really. So then, before I continue, I kind of want to throw this out to our viewers. If you have any questions you would like to ask Manasi or Natalie, you can throw them in the chat. And then we have like 15 minutes allocated for all your questions. But going back to your roles and your work that you guys do, obviously having somebody come in and tell you that, hey, this is how you should approach this is how you should do this for your go-to-market strategy, or those are the things that you should be considering. What are some of the misconceptions in the consultancy industry that you would like to address or that have come up in your work that you know of? And Manasi, I'll start with you.
So for me, it's the misconception would be you're just going to tell us what to do, and that's really not the case. I'm not coming in here and just like sort of steamrolling the company's processes and recommending a lot of changes. So what I do first is I always take the time to understand. So understand the company, understand their business, understand what they're trying to accomplish, not just like sort of the tactical stuff, but also what are the emotions behind it? What's the vision, the mission, and like really take time to understand that. Who are the players within the company? And then making sure once I have that, then I roll up my sleeves because like I mentioned before, I really want to get a 360 view of the company from their product, but also to the internal team as well. And then I work with them together to really build something that that works for their customer, but then works for the team as well. So for example, if I I'm working with, like I've worked with a client, I'm not there to, let's say if there's a process change, if there as part of this training journey that I've created, if there's a process change, I can't just say, this is what it is. We really need to make sure that everyone buys in. And then if someone says, well, let's say the customer success team says this doesn't work for us because of these processes, then I adjust and adapt to make sure that everyone is aligned in supporting the customer. So it really is a team effort. And like I mentioned, I'm really there to support them and partner with them to make sure that it is a success.
Natalie,
thank you so much, Manasi. Natalie, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Of course. Although Manasi and I don't deliver on every engagement together, we do. That's why we get along so well. Approach it in that way, but it works well because of that. And I will say, I mean, some of the misconceptions in some other cases are true, right? I've seen it. I've been given a deck that a company created and said, "Can you help us like bring this to life?" Or use your project management background to like show us how to turn this into an action plan. So there definitely, some of it's real, I think, I hate to say, but I don't have a ton to add based on what Manasi shared. Listening to the culture, adapting, and being there as a trusted partner they could call again later, I think is key. And not, you can have a large organization as long as you're keeping consistency and noticing that those people you bring in to help you, those experts are there, for the greater good and to help without any other, goals. I think that's what to look for.
Absolutely.
So then, Ellie, how long is the relationship between founders and your consultancy services that you both provide?
Yeah, I mean, that it becomes a long trusted relationship and partnership. Recently, so I helped deliver at the beginning. There was a service transformation at a large organization that I helped 3 years ago, different moment, before Crescent Consultancy, and we put a North Star in place. I just interviewed that same head of service on another project at this client 3 years later. And he referenced that work and said that was the thing that changed the culture and increased their NPS score and improved their service metrics because everyone knew how to show up together and for their clients. So it can be 3 years later, or it can be coming back for an engagement that is often 3 to 6 months, depending on what our focus is, but then a refresh later. So I'd say, about 6 months on average, 3 to 6, depending on the size of the org.
Okay, and Manasi, is that the same timeline for you as well, or is that?
Yeah, so for me, it's anywhere from, believe it or not, 6 months to three years, because sometimes when I'm going in, I'll start working with a company and they'll say, well, right now we want to create it. For example, we want to create a training program for our, and I had this, a client of mine, I went in and they wanted to focus on physicians. And so I created a training program focused on physician training. So that was about 6 months. And then they were so happy with it. And it was such a success that they said, well, now that we're done with physicians, we actually want to focus on a behavioral health team. So can you help us create something for the behavioral health team? So then I started working with the behavioral health team to create something for them. So that ended up being a year engagement. And then with another client of mine, since I had created the training program for them and I was so familiar with it, they just relied on me to every couple of months when they needed changes and they needed updates, they would call me back and say, hey, can you come and just update these things for us, because here's the lessons learned and here's what we want to add to it or modify. And so then I just kept updating and sort of maintaining it for them.
Nice. So the next question I kind of have, and if for our viewers or listeners, if you have any questions, please post them, and then we'll ask them to our lovely guest presenters. But whilst they do that, we'll keep on talking about obviously consultancy in VC and also customer experience. One of the questions that I have is, obviously you guys building your companies in the space, you have visions for your companies. So what are some of the short-term and long-term visions about your consultancies in this space?
Natalie, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Can you clarify the question, Emmanuel? Are you looking sort of what's the vision for?
Yeah, for your work, working in this VC space, and especially in healthcare.
Right. Well, I mean, I'd love to continue, and I'd say recently I joined the leadership team at Peak Fractional, which offers C-suite placement advisory and collective work across other experts. So for those who are seeking help either getting ready to buy or exit or go to market or whatever it is, it's just really fun for me to be able to expand that awesome experts that I have to be able to deliver as a CX strategist, but also bring in others. So I'd like to be able to offer more to my clients and to others to be able to help them drive to the consistency, measurable results, a strong strategy, alignment, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Manasi, same question to you.
Yeah. So for me, I would love to be a resource for VCs as they're looking at investing in companies, or if they've invested in companies and they're looking to support the companies as they scale, to really think about what is their training strategy, if they even have one, and really be there as like a trusted partner to help them or to help the companies build it out, or if they have any questions, and just be that that resource. Because I think with with early stage companies, I know sometimes they're not at the point where they're thinking about the customer experience or training, and so I really would love to bring that into early stage companies and have them start thinking about that and having them have those conversations and support the VCs with that process.
So then when you spoke about resources, Manasi, one of the questions I kind of want to continue on that is that how do you aid startups in finding like exit and IP opportunities after you've helped them launch and they've grown to scale to where maybe they're considering acquisition or IPO or an exit? Obviously, you spoke about the timeline between you and founders, a relationship being like maybe 3 months to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of resource do you guys offer them in finding those exit and IPO opportunities, if any at all? So
in the work that I do, I have I would say not directly, but I have a huge network of people that I've worked with in the past. And so if I can support them in that in any way, then I'm always happy to do that.
Okay. Natalie, same thing to you.
Yeah, I think for me, it's mostly about making sure that they're getting the right metrics and numbers and growth and scalability to gear up for that. And then bringing in those other experts. I think for me, I've just had a lot of fun getting more into the M&A space and getting to know a few more folks and thinking about that and hearing the stories from a few close contacts about how amazing it feels to align buyers and to have those hard conversations. So for me, it's ancillary support and kind of like Manasi, like more connections and bringing in the right experts to get them ready for whatever that next stage is.
Okay. And obviously, we've spoken at length about the kind of services you guys provide. Are there any additional services that you guys do help to help founders thrive as they are scaling their companies?
That's a great question. I think there's like a toolkit through going through a whole bunch of transformations to be able to pull from. I think alignment, like for me, I've helped organizations when they've said, we have this pilot that we want to launch. We have this idea, this thing we want to try. So I'll come in with just a handful of sessions, get them thinking about vision, goals, timeline, metric, playbook, contents, all the things that are needed in a really focused way, because everyone has their day jobs, but just to get them ready, geared up, aligned, and then have a really strong activation plan. And this was via a chief marketing officer recently to make sure that they had visibility into what the team was doing and trying out in market. And then for me, I just check in and say, how's it going? Did you do this one? And I just heard about it the other day. So those are the types of things I would say, just quick, focused activation of something that's measurable and organized.
And Manasi, with your work with Safrela Consulting, what sort of additional services do you have outside of the ones that you do provide to founders to really help them thrive as they're scaling and growing their companies?
Yeah, so similar to Natalie, it's the length of the engagement and kind of what they need. It depends on the company. So if they are, let's say, in product, they're doing just product development, and they just want me to come in and say, hey, can you just provide us some guidance for a short engagement? I'm happy to do that as for that, because they might not be fully ready to launch a complete customer training, and that's okay. So really, I work with them in what they need help with in that moment.
Okay. I don't see any questions that have come in, but I kind of have a question. As we've been talking about consulting and healthcare customer experience, obviously there's this big boom of AI that's happening, and people are considering whether AI is going to replace every single thing, including physicians, robotics, everything. So I don't know if there's a fear of somebody replacing their job or whatever, but how do you guys work alongside with the new technologies that are coming out, like AI, for instance, in your roles, or in your work?
I can answer. I've worked with some clients who have not yet adopted AI, and they're only just scratching the surface. Again, highly regulated and maybe less nimble in some cases. And so it's having that conversation to say, well, you can automate this, or you're going to think about what those transactions might feel like if you were able to do XYZ quicker. But I will say on the AI side, one of the biggest conversations that I have is around personalization. I know that's a very, very big one, given so much inauthentic communication that goes out there and our high expectations as consumers, customers. So I tend to lean on, there's a book that came out recently, a BCG book about personalization with AI. And I've had little book clubs with groups of my clients recently because they give a nice framework on how to think about empowering us as consumers and making sure that we have choice, but it feels authentic. So there's a framework I'm happy to share a little bit more about that in the chat or following. But that sets it up to say, just take it slow. Don't overhaul everything. Just find those areas where you can speed things up and keep the human side of things and keep things as personalized as they can, so everyone doesn't feel like you're just sending out communication to them.
Okay. And Manasi, how do you work alongside AI, or how do you see AI or its impact in consultancy or in customer experience as well?
So on the customer experience side, I would look at it, the way that I look at it is it's a tool. It's a great tool to streamline workflows and to enhance the work that I'm doing and that my customers are doing. So when I'm working with AI, it's really like, or let's say they have an AI tool that they're trying to implement. It's not a replacement, like what Natalie said. It's really about using it as a tool to personalize the interaction, but there's still a lot of thought that needs to go into how to leverage it and to make it so that the customer still has a positive experience, and still has that human to human touch at some point. And so how to continue to have excellent customer experience, but using AI as enhancing the workflow. That's how I look at it.
Okay. We're kind of run up on time. Have a few more questions that I want to ask, unless our listeners have questions. What roles do market trends and research play in your guidance of startups? Obviously, do you guys account for those when you're working with them? So what kind of roles do those play? Natalie, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe that's part of the fun of it, is trying to make sure that we're looking outside in and we're listening to paying attention to a competitive analysis. Or for me, I ask the leaders and teams I work with to think outside of their organization, and we talk about those things. Here we're seeing success over here, or even some of the numbers like we talked about earlier. When you lean into this, you're going to get this kind of result. It's a part of the conversation for everyone to lift their head up out of their org and think a little bit more creatively to be able to determine how to differentiate.
Yeah.
So that, yes, the answer is that is definitely a part of it. I'll bring in facts and encourage the team members to start thinking that way if they're not already.
Mm-hmm.
And Manasi, is that the same for you, or do you have a different perspective on that?
No, well, yeah, similar to Natalie, always reading the market trends, especially in healthcare. There's so much that's going on in healthcare, so trying to stay up to speed with what's happening. But the other thing also is looking at, especially in healthcare, with the customer. So what's happening? So if the customer is the clinician, what's happening in their world, and how are market trends or policies impacting them? Because that can impact how they're adopting products. And then same thing for patients, and like really trying to understand what's happening with the patients in that space, that could potentially affect how their perception of products or their willingness to adopt a new product. So I like to always keep reading. I read a lot, so always reading and studying and just having that knowledge.
And I think kind of wrap up on time. But the last question I have is kind of not a personal one, but obviously I've really enjoyed our discussion that we've had on customer experience and on consultancy as well. Somebody once told me that scientists make the worst CEOs, and I think it's kind of true, because we're always focused on like building the product, making sure it's right. So we spend all this time in the lab or in wherever making sure that it comes out right. Mm-hmm. But then, well, I did it, but then who's going to buy it? Who's going to use my product? Yeah. So obviously it was really, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that is kind of true. because, but really hearing all this insightful talk from you guys about customer experience and how do founders, especially those who are in the healthcare space, how do we account for customer experience? How do we account for getting to those people and making sure that their needs are being met, or if we need to hear them, if I incorporate that into our workflows and into our processes that we have at our company. So then the last question I kind of have for you guys as we wrap up here is, can you share some recent customers success stories that you have about how you help those startups thrive within the healthcare ecosystem? I'll kind of take it one step further. If Manasi, you could start from like maybe the person came to you, if there's a experience you have where they came to you at an early stage, and then Natalie, and Natalie, you could maybe start from mid stage, later stage, or if you have any kind of success stories that you want to highlight for us. I'll start with Manasi.
Okay. So I had a client that came to me, and they had basically it was early stage company. They had an onboarding, but it was taking about 2 months to onboard their clients because it was very handheld. So they were using PowerPoints, Zoom meetings. It was very taxing, not just for the customer because it was a lot of information that was being delivered, but then also for the customer success team because over the course of 2 months they were spending hours with onboarding this new client. And so when I came on board, I really took time to assess, okay, what are assess the goals, what does the customer need, how can we create this great experience for the client, because we essentially what was happening was they were feeling overwhelmed, and then they felt the product was too complicated to use because they were just inundated with so much information. That's not the experience that we want to give them. So I worked in 2 ways. I worked with the internal teams, and then I also worked with streamlining the training programs. So what ended up happening was I looked at how can I support the internal team to make this onboarding streamlined and faster. And then for the customer, looked at what do they need to feel supported so they don't feel overburdened with the information that they are being given. And so gathering all of that information. So for example, for the client that they were serving, it was not just about the product, but they had also baked in a lot of domain knowledge. And so the combination of both of those was making the client feel very overwhelmed. And so as I was building out the training program, we implemented certain things, like we did a self-serve model where we built courses. We extended the amount of time between calls, and we also separated the customer segments. So not everybody was getting the same training because a user, in their case, was not the same as a manager. And so like the manager would need something different than the user. And so we did a lot of segmentation. We did a really thoughtful training journey. And then I also helped build out the content, not just for the customer, but then also for the internal teams. And so what ended up happening is that onboarding time was basically, we cut it in half. So out of 2 months, it went down to 1 month. So reduced it by 50%. And in addition to that, the calls, instead of being an hour call, they were now 30-minute calls, and they became more of a check-in because we had created a program for the customer to go through. So they were doing a lot of self-serve learning. And so when they got on the calls, it was more about answering questions and filling in the gaps versus delivering that content. So the customer success team was able to continue supporting the customers without increasing headcount.
That's amazing to see how you took the team from what they didn't even know to now where they're thriving in a different way. Natalie, can you also share your customer experience success story as well?
Yeah, I can. I've kind of a quick one that highlights I think the internal human side of it a little bit too. So I was asked to help with an onboarding experience, and the team had done everything right to get them through mapping out the process and making sure they have an understanding and trying to collaborate when there are different handoffs from, let's say, a sales team to an operations team to a digital team. And they were hitting barriers in being able to make change and smooth out the systems. So having a neutral party come in and go through that process, putting the client at the center and building trust, I'd say, with the teams, had a huge breakthrough moment when the head of the operations team and another operations lead said, yes, this is what we need to do. We should make this consistent. Let's smooth this out. And they were willing to make those changes that would reduce touch points by a significant amount and reduce the service level agreement internally, the SLAs, to set up these client accounts through onboarding. Huge moment to be able to just say, just doing it a little bit differently without the biases makes a big change. On a quick smaller scale, I recently chatted with a sales leader who added a human element to the sales process and saw they doubled their rate of getting, having a meeting and getting towards a conversion. And now they're almost I think it was to 50 something percent. And now they're almost at 90% by having even more warm handoffs and having a person engaged with that particular client along the way.
That is amazing. Thank you. Thank you guys for sharing that, those success stories that really highlight how, as founders, we should be thinking about the impact you guys could have in our work as well. So all too soon, as Nanaya would say, we've come to the end of our webinar. Viewers, listeners, founders, if you're watching us, please, these are two great resources, personnel that you could really reach out to if you're considering launching your product, or if you're even at the early stage. Like they said, 6 months before you launch, you really should be thinking about customer experience, but you can be thinking about it way before. And they're really here to help you out with anything that you have. So their information has been scrolling on the bottom whenever they've been speaking. It's also in our comment section. And if please reach out to them for anything that you have. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We really appreciate it, and all your insight. It's been really amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
We will see you guys later. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.